So I know we have a couple of people gone for some kind of health reason or other issue. So I am going to record this. It's probably going to be helpful when you start working on your assignment. So there is another group assignment that is out there. You will notice for some of you that your groups have changed a little bit, so you'll need to make sure that you look and figure out who's in your group, and you may need to do a little replanning on that. So we shuffled those a little around. There was an assignment last week. I am not going to go over it until Thursday. And part of the reason I'm not going to go over it is I only had 6 people turn it in. 6 people. All the information's there. There's samples, there's examples. And there were only 6 people that decided to turn that in. So if I see it in there by Thursday, I will possibly give some partial credit. But if you're not willing to try and do anything, the other part that was frustrating with that was I got 0 emails, calls, chats, texts, anything saying, hey, can you give me an extra hand on this? So that was a little frustrating. We're going to stay in a math mode for a little bit. So if math is scary, well, it happens. We need to look at it, and it's not as scary as what it could be if you just try to apply and try to look at this. So we're going to look at cost, budgeting, this term called earned value. And we're going to see a lot of pieces in here. So there is actually a cheat sheet that I have made available in week 7 that you might want to grab off and look at because it's got a lot of our formulas right on it. So it's kind of a real quick, handy, these are the formulas. There's not nearly as many as in business finance, but there are some formulas for us to figure out what's going on in the world around us. So this chapter we look at how do we manage those costs. Before we've looked at resources in terms of time, now we're going to look at them in terms of cost, but now we're also going to incorporate time and cost because we know that money is time and time is money in a lot of cases. And so we're going to look at we're going to have a value called earned value. In other words, where we're at on our project at any particular point. So activity costs. What are some of the costs that we're going to have? Well, we know people are probably the most important or most expensive. If I look at Peru State College overall, the majority of the costs of running this college are people. But in any project, we may have materials, facilities. We may have to rent facilities, rent equipment. Travel is certainly very expensive, although the COVID phase has made travel a little different, and now we're doing some things online that we wouldn't. So we also have, maybe if we have to contract out things, anything that's going to cost us money, we need to know about it. And we need to make sure that we include all those items. So historical data from previous projects. People on your project that understand what they're doing in that particular subsegment or segment of that project. Realistic estimates. Sure, it might make you sound good to the boss to say, man, we can do this whole project for $100. But if that's not realistic, it comes back and it's going to bite you in the rear end later on. So realistic estimates. Now the flip side of that is we don't want to make those estimates so high that the project gets canceled either. We need realistic. What has actually happened? Generally, if it's something closer or near-term activities, we can estimate much more accurately than long-term. Think about an electrical project. We're putting in wiring in a building. We don't know what the cost of that wiring is going to be a year from now. And so we have to be careful of what we know now versus what's going to happen in the future. Think about some of the costs that have escalated in this pandemic. What happened to toilet paper, for example? It's expensive now. It's crazy to go buy toilet paper. But other things have dropped. Go book an airline flight right now. Airline flights are at an all-time low in some cases because there's not demand for it. People are scared to go fly places. So, but I don't know that a year from now. Last spring, I would have never predicted that you wouldn't be able to buy toilet paper. Wasn't on my radar list of things that were going to happen. So we want to get as close an estimate of those costs as we can. So here's some costs listed on, this is that consumer market study. And notice we have a couple of things here. So we have Susan, and we know how many days she's going to work. Susan gets $260 a day for a labor rate. Does that seem high? What is that an hour if she works an 8-hour day? So it's actually probably a pretty low estimate, quite frankly. How much? $32.50. Do you guys want to make $32.50 an hour when you get out of here? Yeah. So that's roughly $60,000 a year. That's not that much for a marketing consultant. And if we're including overhead costs, that's actually pretty cheap. What does it cost to go in and get your car worked on right now at most mechanics? No, you guys know. So I had my motorcycle at a motorcycle mechanic the other day, labor rate $90 an hour. When I took a Toyota into the Toyota dealer, $155 an hour. This one, I just didn't have time and a place to do it. So unfortunately, I had to take it in. So yeah, that one I would have done. This I had to replace the fork seals, and I didn't have a place to pull out the whole front end of the bike. So our costs are in here. And we'll notice we also have time. So we're equating time to costs. We have labor costs. Here we have material costs, printing a questionnaire. Here we have a mailing. So why would that mailing be so expensive? Stamps, postage. If I'm doing this a year out, am I going to know what the postage is going to be? I might be guessing at what postage is going to be. So most of our costs in a lot of cases are labor. There is a little bit of travel cost in there. But here we have a budget. We say, man, we think this whole thing, $39,000. And we're going to get this done. So this work breakdown then, we have a couple of ways we can do it. So how do we figure our costs? So generically, there's two great strategies. Strategy A is we approach it from the top. So if we were doing a budget for our college that way, the president would do a top-line budget for each department and say, here you go, here's your budget. The bottom-up approach would be to have each individual or each department conduct a budget and say what their needs are and send it up. So there's advantages to both of these. So there's an advantage to either direction. Top down, we look historical data and say, all right, Peru State College historically has spent $1.5 million on this department. So we already have some high-level executives involved. On the other hand, bottom-up can sometimes be more accurate because we get that minutia. So I love President Hansen. President Hansen doesn't know what I want to spend for replacement computers in the computer lab, nor does he probably care, quite frankly. That's not his level of expertise. So top level, bottom level. So sometimes we approach some hybrid strategies where we do both. And one of the things that happens with that, if I say to every department, man, I need your budget, everybody's going to go, man, I need 72-inch TVs on every wall, and so when I get the sum of those budgets, it's going to be way too high. And so we're going to have to do a little bit of finagling. So we know that we can't fulfill every piece of a budget on any project we do. We can't do everything in there. So these are some models we can use to try to come up with a little better scenario to get closer to that actual budget. So here we have a budget: design, build, install, and test. And here we can actually put some pieces down then into here. So packaging machine, design, build, install, and test. And notice if those are added right, those should add up to that 100,000. So as we break it down, we can get closer and closer results. So if I break down all the way down to those work breakdown structures that I know about time and I know about budgeting, hopefully, it can be a really accurate way to do it. What we haven't talked about yet is how to do this budget over time. Because different projects can demand different times of when we fund them. So if I'm doing a project that has a lot of materials involved in it, oftentimes that budget starts very high because we have to purchase all those materials. So at the beginning of our project, that first initial month or whatever, we break our project down into time phases, it takes a lot of money in that initial phase. And then as the project goes along, we reduce the number of workers, and finally it tails off at the end. There are other projects, depending on that structure, that may look differently. We have ones that the budget will start out very low, how much we're spending. Now this is cumulative budget here, so be aware of that. But we'll spend, and then our spending kind of tapers off. So if I look at it per period. If I like cumulative, this also shows, oh, well, this didn't start out as high because we're looking at that slope, and then that slope, in this case, increased at a fairly linear rate. So this project, if I look at each week, our budget per week goes up towards about week 7, and then it kind of drops. And so we can build a spreadsheet, and we can say, here's our cumulative dollars we spent. So our budgeted cost then, in this particular case, we've listed it by week, and over here we put it by task. So I could look at each task, I could look cumulatively. So things like Excel, great. Project management software can also do these kinds of things. This gives us a way we can see where we're going to spend money. I need to go to the accountants in week 6 and say, oh, this week we're going to spend $8,000. Next week we're going to spend $12,000. So that they know when we need cash draws, so that the cash is there or whatever we need. Because we budgeted this way, that means it's going to work this way, right? No. So here's where it gets ugly, is then we have to figure out what that actual cost then. So a lot of times we derogatorily say the term bean counter, and we say, man, those accountants on this project are driving me crazy. They're not driving you crazy. What they are doing is trying to hold you accountable for when you're spending money, what you're spending money on, making sure that it's allocated to the correct project. So, in fact, on that project then, it's allocated to the correct package numbers or work breakdown numbers, so we know where we're spending money. So actual cost, we need to do it fairly regularly. And if you've been a project manager, the accounting staff is going to hound you and say, why do I not have these numbers? Why do I not have this dollars? It's the only way we really can keep track of what's actually happening versus what we predicted is going to happen. So there is a term that is called committed costs. So committed cost means I know that I'm going to spend that money. It may be paid later. So I may have committed to buy a load of 2x4s. They're not here yet, but I know in week 8 those are going to arrive. Or I may have committed to buy a bunch of asphalt or a machine or something else. So the accountants are putting in all these numbers. And what we want to do is be able to compare actual cost to our budgeted cost. So We can calculate that cumulative actual cost. Excel is our friend. We put in numbers. And then we can compare it, and we can see where we are in terms of a budget. So at this point, if I look at week 8, so week 8, it says, all right, we're in the build phase. Our cumulative cost is $68,000. But our planned cost, if we went back, and sometimes it's kind of handy to have those multiple monitors or multiple pieces of paper, our planned cost was only $64,000. Does that automatically mean we're bad, that the project is bad? From a cash perspective, we are a $4,000 variance or a difference. But do we have the details yet to know if that's really bad or not? No. We know that dollar-wise we're behind. In other words, we've spent more than we had calculated. And if I graphed it out, you can see, hey, here we've got a $4,000 cost overrun. But let's say that our project has been going along so well that everything has moved left. In other words, all of our activities have went in less time than we thought. So while we're in week 8 of our budget, man, we just finished the assignments that were due on week 10. Then maybe we might go, man, we're actually ahead. And so we need some more tools to look at some of these items. So right now I can say, according to our carefully calculated budget, we've spent $4,000 more than we had originally accounted for. But I can't yet say that it's bad. So I have to do something else first. And what I have to come up with is I have to see what that earned value, in other words, the stuff I have done, what is the value of that work that I have done? So here's an example. So we're going to paint 10 rooms. We budgeted $2,000, so in other words, $200 per room. We've spent $1,000, bless you, but we've only painted 3 rooms. So right off the head, if I just think about that, man, we spent half our budget, right? Have we got half the rooms painted? Oh. So we know right off just by looking at it, but we need to come up with a mathematical model that we can look at it that way. So earned value then is how much have we done times our budget for that assignment. So our earned value is $600. So earned value 600, spent value 1,000. Oh. Now we can say that there is a problem because we've done the work to get paid for $600, but we've spent $1,000. So earned value, we need to be able to calculate. It's that idea of our budgeted cost times the percent of work done. So if instead I had painted 5 rooms, 0.5 or 50% times 2,000 would be $1,000 in earned value. Hey, we're right on target. And if I had painted 6 rooms, so 0.6 times 2,000, so I'd have $1,200 of earned value. I've only spent 1,000. I would actually be ahead. My variance would be positive instead of negative for this. So Excel is really great for these kinds of things because it can make all these calculations for us. So percent complete. So notice we just listed our cumulative percent complete in here. So 10% complete, 25, 80, 90, 100, and then it's going to stay 100. It doesn't magically go above that. 5, 15, 25, 40, 50. So then we can create a spreadsheet or a piece of this, and we can actually, because here we have our budgeted cost, here we have our percent, we can actually see what our earned value is for each one of those activities. So in this case, now this chart makes a little more sense. So up here at this little dash line, the accumulated actual cost is up here. That's at that $68,000 mark. Our budgeted cost is $64,000. That's the solid line. And then our cumulative earned value, is $54,000. Do we think there's a problem with this project? Are we ahead or behind on this project, you think? So, earned value, we've earned $54,000 of value in this project. Our cost so far has been $68,000 out of a budgeted $64,000. So now do we have enough details to start thinking about where are we at in this project? Do we have enough values? Do we have enough? Can we look at it in terms of a ratio? We're getting closer. I would think your radar would start to go off that your cumulative earned value is significantly less than your budgeted or your actual cost. That should probably throw something off in you and you go, ooh. Now, we don't really know how much, because in this scale of a project, that may be significant, $10,000 different from budgeted, or maybe a minuscule amount. We don't have that detail. But we can come up with it. So here's where that cheat sheet comes in. So we have a lot of values. TBC, total budgeted cost. CBC, cumulative budgeted cost. CAC, cumulative actual cost. And CEV, cumulative earned value. When we plot them, then it's going to show us those trends. And so if I look back at that graph, sometimes we can see things graphically that make a lot more sense. And so what we can see from this trend is, does it look like our cost is way ahead of our performance? And it looks like that trend is increasing. Because if I look at week 7, and I go all the way back to week 5, they're on top of each other. We're doing really great. Something has happened between week 5 and week 8, and this might be where we start to analyze and try to dig into this project and try to figure out what happened or why is this project going off the rails a little bit. So here's those numbers also as a percent. So we're supposed to have spent 64% of our budget. We've actually spent 68%, and we've completed 54% of the work. Now does that look a little scarier? And we would start to, okay, it's not my imagination. That projector keeps blinking, right? Okay, I'm not just having a seizure of some sort. So now we can actually use a formula. So these are the best way we measure things, just like in business finance when we look at all those financial measures, is with a ratio. And a ratio can tell us something that raw numbers don't. If I said, man, this company I own, I just made $1 million profit this year, does that really tell you anything? What if it's a company the size of Ford Motor and they only made $1 million profit? Would that be alarming? But on the other hand, what if it's a lemonade stand and I made $1 million profit? I'm doing something really right. So I'm selling other products off the side. So the first value we're going to have is something called a CPI, or Cost Performance Index. So Cost Performance Index, and if you have your cheat sheet out, you can use that also. So I will say that cheat sheet is allowed on the final. CEV, cumulative earned value, divided by cumulative actual cost. So if my project is exactly on target, that value should be 1. If it's lower than 1, then I have an issue. If it's greater than 1, I'm producing at a higher than expected rate. So think about it this way. This may be the best way. So in this particular case, we calculated it. Cumulative earned value, 54,000. We divided it by the cumulative cost of 68,000, and we got a value of 0.79. So what that says, for every dollar we spent, we only earned 0.79 or 79 cents of value. Oh, now that's starting to look pretty bad. So maybe we can figure out something else with it. So CPI, Cost Performance Index. So the way to think about that, your 1 is your target, below 1 is bad, above 1 is good. If we're above 1, we're actually producing more value than we're spending. If it's 1, they're equal. We're spending the same amount of money we are in earning a value. And that's hopefully what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to as close to 1 as possible in this particular thing. So we take some of those values then. So cost variance, in other words, what the change of cost is, that variance. So cost variance is accumulated value minus actual cost. So in this case, is that going to be a positive number or a negative number? What is our accumulated values? And so we have to think about what those are going to be. In this case, we say 54,000 minus 68,000 is negative. So if this variance is negative, that also tells us we did not create as much value as what we spent. Well, crud. So this one's probably one of the easier ones because we can just subtract. We have to make sure we're subtracting the right numbers, and the most common thing people will do is they're subtracting the budgeted cost out of here, not the actual cost. So cost variance. We also have the little problem with our numerical data in that at this point we know something is wrong with this project. How much money is it going to cost us to get this project back on track and to finish it? So the book actually shows at least 3 different methods that you're going to use. So forecasted cost at completion. So there's a couple of really easy ones. There's a little tougher ones, but it's really just a formula. And what we're really trying to do is figure out where our project is at, what is it going to cost us then to finish that. So the first method here, total budgeted cost divided by that CPI. And I'm going to argue that's probably the most accurate method that we have. Because what it's saying, this is that ratio of our project, how it's going at this point. Nothing has said in this project yet that magically at week 8 we're going to suddenly improve that efficiency and we're going to suddenly shoot to the top and finish our project on time and on budget. So if our project started out and historically has been at this level, this is probably the most accurate method. This method, so cumulated cost plus total budgeted cost minus expected value, what this does is says at this point, at week 8 in our project, suddenly this project is going to turn around and all of our budgeted costs are going to be accurate, and we're going to add in that little extra piece from original when we're behind, and we're going to come up with a new cost. It is probably the least accurate of these methods, in my opinion. So, this one I think is going to be unrealistic, because what that's saying, magically we're going to go from 0.79% efficiency or cost CPI to a CPI of 1 in week 9. and we're going to finish out the project. Now, this is the one your boss wants to hear, though. All right, we've been behind. I yelled at all the employees, and suddenly we're going to do everything on time. That's the one they would like to hear. It's not very realistic, in my opinion. So, this cost index is kind of the opposite way. So, in this particular case, we plug our numbers, total budgeted cost, accumulated value, and we get a value here, minus total budgeted cost minus accumulated cost. We get a ratio, and it says, man, 1.44. We multiply that times 100, and it says, we think it's going to take $144,000 to finish this project. And I think these tend to round too high. I think a project, once it's established and once we're ongoing. Now, one thing you can do to determine what might be the better method is if I calculated that CPI every week, and every week it's 0.79, method 1 is probably the most accurate. On the other hand, if I'm calculating this project and it's actually started out worse, so it started at 0.4, and now it's up to 0.79, and it looks like it's on a trend to get better and better. Well, I'm not sure that this is still the best method, but it's probably closer. It's somewhere in between those two models. Other companies have all different other kinds of ways. So we could figure out the slope of that line, that CPI line every week, and we could use that as a method. So there's graphical methods. There are probably hundreds upon hundreds of different ways we could do it. These are the couple of models we're going to use to try to figure this out. Because I can tell you one of the models that gets used a lot is we call it the wild guess model. So you go, man, all right, this model says 126, this model says 114, this one says 144. 125,000, yep, there we go, there's our number. But we also probably have a little better idea than just looking at these numbers in the book. We also probably know how this project is done. What have we done historically? Now, if we have a lot of historical data and we're still getting a CPI of 0.79, we didn't budget correctly to start with. Does that happen a lot? Yes. People will under-budget a project trying to figure out how they can get their bid to be the most competitive. So, there's 3 different methods that we can use right there. So how do I start to control some of that? So if I'm regularly looking at these values, I'm a little scared. I get these negative cost variances. It shows that we're spending too much money. We're not ahead on our project yet. What can I do to fix it? What might be something I can do to fix the fact that I'm behind in terms of cost? So if I'm behind on costs on a highway construction project, does changing the supplier of the toilet paper in the porta pots, is that going to have an effect on the project? I need to look at those big scale actions. So what is the big scale action that I can look at? So maybe on a road highway project, I can go, hey, you know what? If I renegotiate my rental contract for all this equipment really quickly, maybe I can correct that project. You may even go, well, I know my budget's been wrong. I need to examine my contract because part of the reason my costs are too high is the cost for materials has went up significantly. Do we have anything in that contract that says if the cost of aggregate materials goes up more than 2%, we can renegotiate part of that costing? So sometimes we look at that. We may look at ways to compress time. So how do we also compress time? So maybe I have another construction crew that's finishing up work and I can move them in on that job. If I can compress time and actually make the project more efficient, I might also be able to do that because that value is also based on how much time there is. So I can renegotiate what the scope of that is. Well, you know, originally we were going to have a 6-foot shoulder on this road. Kansas Department of Transportation, can we do a 5-foot shoulder and get us back on track? So sometimes we can renegotiate. Those negative cost variances over time are what's going to put our project behind schedule and budget. And so we need to be looking at those cost drivers. What is our cost? Why are we higher? There's drastic actions. What if we fired all of our laborers and rehired ones at minimum wage? So this is a strategy that actually gets employed a lot of times on software projects. And we're not firing necessarily people that are making minimum wage. We're firing programmers. We're firing our IT staff. And what do we do to replace them? So in some cases, we outsource or even offshore that work to try to bring those costs down. I can hire an engineer, a software engineer from India or Bangladesh or China for about 1/3 the cost I can hire somebody in the US. Now, do they have equal performance? We have those language issues, culture issues, but could it be a way that I could bring this project back online? It's certainly possible. But it's, again, we need to control that and figure out where is our cost coming from. So the other issue that seems to happen, does anybody ever have enough cash? You guys always reach in your pocket and you pull out a stack of $100 bills? Notice I reached in and there's nothing in there. So we may want to renegotiate or work on how do we get cash payments. Very few contracts do we wait till the end of the contract to get paid for the entire thing. So we don't want to sign up for those. We want to set up some kind of an equal distribution at some kind of a milestone. So if you've ever built a house, there's milestones along there. Walls are up. Buildings, what they call dried in other words, it's weatherproof, a milestone. And so we want to make those equal payments. We sometimes require a down payment. So maybe we have a down payment and that provides for the materials for our project or part of our project costing. So we need to control that cash coming in, because one of the horrible problems with a lot of projects, we have more cash going out than we have cash going in. So we may have projects that look on paper like we're going to make a lot of money, and we have to figure out how we can negotiate that to get that money back to us. So when I was out many years ago and I was part owner of a company, and we were doing directional boring and entire outside plant services for the cable industry, the fiber optic industry, one of the warning signs to us was some of the companies we were doing business with were taking longer and longer to pay us. We still had our loan payments on $150 million worth of equipment, but now some of these companies are taking longer and longer and longer to pay us. And so we had to go in and try to negotiate with them. In some cases, we would go negotiate because we could see the writing on the wall. We tried to negotiate, all right, if you pay 80% of what you owe us, we'll just cancel that out. We went to companies that do something called factoring. In other words, they buy our accounts receivable and would give us part of the money. The end result, it really wasn't enough. And the company I worked in, when several of the companies that owed us, in one case they owed us over $100 million, went bankrupt and said, well, you're never going to see that money. Eventually we were like, well, I guess we're going bankrupt too. Merry Christmas. So how do we control that cash? And so some of that is seeing what's going on in the market. Do you check on your company using things like Dun & Bradstreet to make sure that that company's been around for a while? Check on them. Down payments are a great way to start out on a lot of these contracts. Dividing up those payments to you so you're getting them at regular intervals. You need to control your own cash spending, but you also need to be able to figure out how you're getting money in. It all looks great on paper, but when that company says, well, we're bankrupt, I'm sorry, we're filing a motion, and your accounts receivable is nothing, you're like, ooh, this is bad. So how do I get those down payments? Did any of those companies, did they do it on purpose? No. And the companies that we owed money to then, they're expecting those cash payments, right? We didn't do it on purpose, but it's something that can happen. And so those are techniques we do that we try to get that money up front. So just recently, because we bought a house and we thought about putting in a sprinkler system, I got a quote from a vendor that said, hey, we can do this. Now, I've had sprinkler systems installed before. I was very shocked by the size of this quote. So this quote showed up for $11,000 for a sprinkler system on probably less than it's a tiny lot. It is not huge at all. 10,000 square foot lot, quarter of an acre roughly. But what was interesting was they actually had that detailed out. And so up front, they wanted $2,500, which is quite frankly about what I thought the estimate would be, having done it before. And then they had regular payments throughout. Completion of the underground sprinkler system, another like $4,000. And then getting the electrical and plumbing and everything wired up, test system. And then so they had it broken out into staggered payments. Now, I'm going to go get a couple more estimates because the last time I had a sprinkler system done, it was like $1,500 on about the same size thing. So it seems really high, but I just thought that was really interesting the way they had that structured out. My guess is that down payment's going to cover all of their costs on that entire project. Materials, labor, and everything. And it's honestly a good way to do it. Put that out front. Never wait for people to do that. So, get the money, figure out ways to do it. Cash flow. If your project is running differently than what you anticipated, don't be afraid to renegotiate. Companies are willing to do that. But you have to make a good faith effort. You have to talk to them, figure out why we're behind, why this is behind. Can we renegotiate these payment phases? And what's going to happen with this project? Because the last thing they want to do is this project to fail completely. So if our software project goes off the rails completely and doesn't go to fruition, they've got to start over, right? You're building a house. You've got a half-completed house. Nobody wants that. They're willing to go negotiate with you. Nobody wants half of a road. It'll look like Highway 2 and be as rough, right? So you can manage some of those cash flow expectations. So I want to finish this up and go through that again. There is a video in week 7. I thought I had it up, but clearly I've apparently lost my mind. Grade Center assignments, week 5, 6, 7. So there is a video that there will be a short quiz about on Thursday. So this activator video, it's about 20 minutes, and I went along talking. So I'd like you to watch that. There will be a short quiz of about 2 questions on that video. It explains a lot of what we're going to do. There is a group project. This group project lives down here. So here's your cheat sheet. This group project should look very similar to what we just looked at really quickly. So we have a chart that has budgeted costs. We have a chart that has actual costs. These values are all in thousands. So there's some questions. What's the cumulative actual cost at the end of week 6, week 8? And at each of those, you need to determine whether there is a cost overrun or underrun. In other words, a variance. Where is it being driven from? And then we have a couple of other ones. So now down here is cumulative percentage of completion by task. And I need you to calculate what the CPI then is at week 6. What is its cost variance? What is the CPI at week 8? What is the cost variance? And then notice the data stops at week 8 for our percentage of completions. What is the actual cost of the entire project using the first 2 methods? So here's where I'm going to tell you something interesting. Notice I have actual costs in here. Ignore those because I put them in so you could see what your predicted actual costs were compared to what the actual costs were. I guess that's a way to phrase that. So when you're building your FCAC, you don't know these values here. But you'll be able to use them later to see if that is actually so it's kind of a check value to see if you're in that range. All right, this is done as a group project, so only your group leader or one person in your group will turn this in. So there's some questions in here. So the first thing I would do is probably build a spreadsheet with this data. You have a couple of questions. I would probably do those in a Word document, and then I would paste the spreadsheet then into the Word document to make one document that you're going to turn in. This really shouldn't take a lot of time, but I want to see what's going to happen then in this project. So remember, when you're calculating actual costs, when you build your spreadsheet, just take those out temporarily. So weeks 9 and 10. You don't know those, nor do you actually know the percentage. We don't know if the project really finished at week 10, but I threw them in so we could run a calc and just kind of have, so the same values, how I modified them from the original, are present in those three, if that makes sense. So you don't know weeks 9 and 10. You know the budgeted cost for weeks 9 and 10. So we know we can figure out the entire budget for the project. You can pull this, so this is your actual cost, but you need to calculate it not knowing weeks 9 and 10. That's probably a little more complicated than I intended, and I can just pull those numbers out if it makes. I just wanted to give you a value so you could see if what you're doing seems to fit that model, and then we can talk about what the actual cost versus our predicted cost, because you're going to have two different methods to calculate FCAC. So one of them uses CPI and should be fairly consistent, I think, with this one. So if you guys start on this, you can certainly ask questions then on Thursday about where we're at, what you're doing. So this shouldn't, again, 30 minutes, 45 minutes as a group probably. It shouldn't be overwhelming in terms of length. But you'll be able to need to use that, whatever group messaging and such you have, or a way to meet in person or whatever you want to do. Again, that's due Sunday. Any questions on it already? No? Yes? No? All right. I am going to stop recording.